I've come on here with a question for Larissa, but first of
Welcome
all,
to.
welcome to the Bear Collective podcast.
Well, we do not have a typical intro to any of our
No,
podcasts.
no, we're thinking about one. Thinking about one. If anyone has
Um,
any suggestions.
I mean, we talk about personal development, we talk about self growth, we talk about being vulnerable, and we share that through our experience, our learnings, and life. That's the crux of it. If there are any, marketing experts out there that want to.
Hit us up. So my question for you, and something I've been pondering just based on a few things in my life and the lives of others, is are you anxious about death?
Not where I thought we were going today. Am I anxious about death? I probably would say it's not something that I've thought deeply about for myself. Obviously, I've shared a little bit that, my mom has passed away. So I've looked at death in the face as it was happening. And I've also had that as a secondary experience with a partner whose father passed away. And I was there again when he took his last breath.
So you
So
you were there in that final moment for both of those individuals.
Yeah, for my mom and for a previous partner's father who passed. So I wouldn't say there's anxiousness because I guess I've looked at it
you've
and
seen it
and been firsthand in it. Why does that? Do you have an anxiousness about?
The reason this has been really poignant within my thoughts lately is I didn't.
Yeah.
And I don't for myself. I'm quite comfortable with the idea. However, now that I have a child, the anxiety comes in for me around not being here for him anymore. So I've been watching this really interesting process of how it's shifted a little bit, because before him, I would have said, like, absolutely, when it's my time, it's my time.
With that though, can I ask, when you think about it like that, I think the expectation unconsciously in people's mind is that death happens when you're like, I don't know, for me when my mum passed, I was like it was a shock. She was 66 when she passed, which is just way too young. And my expectation was like, this shouldn't be happening until like she's in her season above.
Yes.
So when you think or when you had thought about it previous to having Austin, was there an age in a sense that, or did that kind of come into play? Like, because it can happen anytime.
It can happen anytime. And I was very well aware of that. And I was okay with that. A big part of that for me, and something I have certainly told others, is that was partially because I felt like and still feel like I'm living a very fulfilling life, which to me, and something I do say often, is you will be more anxious of death if you're not truly living. And so
that really hits.
Yes. Yeah. And so for me, I've been really truly living and very passionate about the way I'm living. Of course, I have my down days. Like postpartum was just ugh. An experience. However, coming out of that now and really embracing motherhood, like it's brought a whole new level to that fulfillment. You have to go through those dark days, like a dark night of the soul, to come out and evolve. So yeah, I definitely think that plays into it. But yeah, it's death anxiety is something that I'm seeing unconsciously beneath so much anxiety, just generalized anxiety. And I've got so many thoughts around this. And so I wanted to pick your brain and like just put it out there for people, because I mean, how many of you are sitting here and it's the first time, as I've asked that question of Larissa, that you're, sitting there and thinking, oh yeah, wow, death. Like I don't really think about it.
Yeah. Is it a thought you avoid?
Yes.
What's really interesting in my coaching spaces is there's often a task, and I'm going to share this with everyone, and I give you the opportunity to do it yourself because it's very, very interesting. It's very confronting, but it's very interesting, is depending on what the client is obviously coming into the coaching container for and where they're at. But I have them write a eulogy for themselves of, and taking it in chapters of just kind of like the first 10 years that between 10 and 20, between 20 and 30, 30 and 40, 40 and 50. So it's a retrospective of like, how do you want people to speak about you, but what is the kind of life that you've lived? Because that, when you do this task, and whilst it can be confronting for some, it's also highly illuminates how you want to live your life and where the gap is between where you are now and getting there. Because I think regardless of your age, there is always still time. One thing which is going to be, feels like such a sidetrack, but I think it's Colonel Sanders, the guy from KFC. I think he was like in his 60s or 70s when he came up with the secret recipe. So my thing always as well is that life is not over at any age.
Yes.
I think often that can kind of play into it, that there's a fear of like, I'm too old to do this, or I'm not old enough to do this.
There is still such a stigma around age in society. I mean, you know, I've read and seen like just snippets of things about women who, as they age, you know, they just feel so invisible within society. And I do think we really, personally, I don't see that we live in a culture that actually celebrates age or celebrates death and what that means afterwards. So many like Eastern or different religions around the world, like Buddhism, will, you know, they see it as a celebration. They see it as a passing on, a passing through. They don't see it as an ending. And this is where I find that, you know, one way to work with death anxiety when you're ready to not avoid the idea of death anymore is, what are your beliefs about it? Most people, when I ask them this question, they say, I don't have any, which, you know, of course, with the way that religion is in our world at the moment, but it's so important to do the research and go and figure out, okay, what do I believe happens afterwards? What do I believe the purpose of life is, to really help you balance out and accept and face a little bit more what death is all about.
I think when you say like, what is the purpose of life? I think that brings on a lot of anxiety for people.
There's so many.
Because for many people, there's no clarity on their life for that. So how would you help someone, or what advice would you give to help someone sit with that question
of what the purpose of life is?
Yeah, for them,
yeah.
You know, when it comes to this kind of like life or death conversation.
Yes. So first go research, get some beliefs about the purpose of life. But on a more personal level, I always recommend like two things. One, I definitely was influenced by Jay Shetty on this one, in his book, Think Like a Monk. And it is to look at what your skills are and what you're passionate about. And then, of course, the opposite of that, what you're not passionate about, what your skills aren't. The combination and where you will find purpose is what you're passionate about and where your skill set is. You know, for us, it's landed us here and in the healing and personal development space. And that will bring in, you know, skills like communication, passion for growth and evolution, and, you know, I guess spiritual evolution as well. So it's really just finding that box and looking at, okay, well, what sorts of things fall within that box for me? And it doesn't have to just be based on career. It can be based on, you know, any activity that you do within your life. And another place that I get people to look at for clues is their values.
Something that I think is so forgotten, and something that I think people don't realize also shifts through phases of their life.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this year, I reevaluated what my values were compared to, say, 2 years ago.
Oof.
And I think it's a task that for myself, or an activity that I'm going to do every year, just to make sure, again, I'm in alignment with where your values are. Because if you channel your energy into your values, that brings you home to your truth and your authenticity, and again to your beliefs.
Yes.
You kind of know what you stand for, what you don't, what you believe, what you don't.
Yes.
But then also you can see what's evolving in those spaces.
Absolutely. And the more aligned you live to your values, the less likely you are to suffer from, you know, the symptoms of anxiety or of depression. So it's very, very much, you know, important to our mental health in general. But it's amazing to think, how much they can shift over time.
And I'm just having a thought now back to like your original question about like, do I have kind of like death anxiety? And definitely when you first asked that, it's not something that I truly thought of because I had the experience of looking death in the face. But I want to just reflect now. What's come up is when that happened, I was in the corporate world. So it was a huge shift and a defining moment for me about how precious life is. And for me, it created this quote that I've come up with by Larissa.
I've definitely seen it other places, but I love that you call it
It's
yours.
mine. I think the language is mine.
Okay.
But this, it really brought home for me the importance that this is your one wild and precious life. By wild, I mean adventure, exploration, curiosity, expansion, like colorful, like a painting, like a tapestry, like you get to create your life. And realizing how precious it is that time. You don't know when your time is up, but also how you spend your time and your energy. So that's what wild and precious mean for me in those moments. And definitely it was a defining moment and a shape-shifting thing for me that I was like, do I want to be in corporate where people are, you know, trying to put out fires and they're thinking that everything is urgent? And I'm kind of like, this isn't literally life or death. Like, why you're getting really stressed out and really like worked up over this problem. This is not like, you're not curing cancer. You're not like solving a world war here. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And I was really struggling internally. And for me at that stage, it created an uncertainty about what my path was. But going back to a word that you said, which was fulfillment. So for me, what fulfillment looked like in the years following was that exploration. And it was about things that made me happy. And we just talked about this literally on a previous episode. It was, you know, when I'm sitting as a grandma looking down at my like grandchildren and telling stories, because I think that's what happens when you get old. It's like you sit on a rocking chair and like the kids listen to like your stories of like how you live life and different things, and you share these things that they just don't expect of you, like that you would have done because they see you as this old person. And it was just living my life in a way of experiencing life, and through, you know, going and seeing, like having a palm reading done, you know, just for shits and giggles, not necessarily being really attached to it, but having that experience. It was going and traveling overseas and experiencing different cultures and learning, like it was, what can I learn from that? What can I take from that? And what can I incorporate into my life? And those little things brought fulfillment.
Yes.
It's, you know, it's the self-exploration of going out, you know, by yourself, walking without a phone and having that sensory experience of, you know, the attachment that we so have to our phone right now, that we need it for any emergency, and going out for a walk and realizing, well, you know what, there's other human beings around. If any emergency happened, I can actually go up to a fellow human being on this earth and ask for help in an emergency. And having that kind of like realization. So living life in just a very open, exploring kind of way brought fulfillment until I landed on, you know, wanting to, you know, go and deeply study in coaching. And
and I think that hits like a really important point. I often see so many people struggling while they feel like they don't have a purpose and can't find a purpose. Perhaps
too in their head.
Perhaps part of the adventure and the wild and the precious is in the experimentation, in the finding, in the exploration of that. And it's how, it is how you embrace and lean into the feelings that come with adventure and seeking and exploration.
Absolutely. Very much so, because if you sit just in your head without taking action, that's where the thoughts create the chaos, which stirs up the anxiety and the stress. You need to get it out. That's why that journaling, or that kind of that practice of doing a eulogy, is a really good thing, because it gets you thinking in a constructive way, like you're zooming out on your life, a life that you haven't lived, and you can actually see how many years. Again, guys, do it to the fact that you're 100. There's so much like technology and things out, you know, always evolving, that like, I think just, you know, you don't know when your time is up. However, if you just zoom it from 100 years old and look back at your life, take it from that place and just start trying things and start, you know, it can be as simple as exploring going to a cafe or another suburb by yourself and seeing what that brings up for you. It can be reflecting and going and looking back at, you know, pictures of your childhood and seeing the things that you enjoyed in childhood doing and going back and doing those things, like a dance class or an art class or something that you were really good at when you were young, or swinging a hula hoop or something, you know. And just to take it more back into the way, something that you mentioned as well was just how we experience death. Like we were watching a movie last night that was one based from a set in Mexico, right?
I feel like it's Mexico, but
yeah.
it's a Spanish speaking. I'm pretty sure it's Mexico because it celebrates the Day of the Dead, and
which is about, you know, celebrating and honoring those that have come, you know, before us as well. And it's such a beautiful thing that they have. Whereas, yeah, you're right, here in Australia, we don't have anything like that.
No, we have nothing. In fact, like, you know, I know your mum's funeral was different and she wanted happy songs and those sorts of things.
We danced the nutbush around her coffin at her request, guys.
I might like wrongly say here, that's uncommon in Australia, right?
Yep. 100%.
And this is like we do, it's almost like
that
we
was
create
her request.
Yes, which is beautiful.
Yeah, she wanted a celebration of life because she herself saw, I guess, the experience of like how people just went into, yes, there's going to be a natural mourning, but it was like it's her gift of what she wanted was like everyone wear color. She didn't want, you know, where people come and put flowers, like in part of the ceremony, they'll come and lay flowers on the coffin and say their last goodbyes. She had a pen marker and we wrote, everyone got the opportunity to write on her coffin. And the amount of people that we have had come back to us and say that they had shared that idea with, you know, other families and friends and things who'd passed, and that has now taken on as like a little subtle kind of like trend is really, really cool.
And it really shows that people are craving something more from this, something more than the, like, I mean, I love the shade black, but something more than like the black doomsday. This is, you know, so
coffin color was teal. Books were in like her favorite, like her.
I want to take a note out of her book when I go. Absolutely.
I don't know if people felt fine as more, but what was really interesting is that she had requested, you know, that color coffin. And when the funeral director came to sit down and plan and pick out a color, you think there's like 50 shades of gray, right? There's like 100 shades of like teal and turquoise. So we're looking at all these colors going, which is the right one? Like, which is the right colors? Yeah, it's not like a simple kind of like pencil box. This is your 24 colors that you get to pick. It is like, going to...
So be really specific.
Pretty much.
And do you know what? I think, I'm guessing that there was a level of you knowing what your mum wanted because obviously, like, she knew that this was coming.
Yeah.
And you had time to discuss it with her. Am I right?
Yeah and no. Yes and no. When my mum was diagnosed, she was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, something that came back a second time around. And we were told that we had 24 months. We had 2 years with her. And we got 11 weeks.
Okay.
So it came really, really quick. So yes, there were conversations around, and one of my aunts who works as a nurse was really good, like, in leading this because she's obviously seen a lot working in a hospital.
Yes.
You know, and she kind of had a conversation and kind of like led that conversation. Okay, what kind of things do you want? And then it's also just thinking about funerals that you have been to and kind of going, I like that they did that, or I didn't like that they do that, and I would, you know, what is it that I want instead?
Yeah.
So it was just having those questions, and I think it was really helpful because even though my aunt was you know, emotionally invested obviously with my mum, she was able to just ask the right questions to help lead my mum or guide my mum to reveal the things that she wanted. But we didn't have all the answers. Like, we didn't know how many songs that they play at a funeral.
Yeah.
You know, so we had a couple of songs that she wanted, but then my brother and I had to pick some songs. And I will say that, like, as to children, you're just trying to get it right. And
of course,
that's a bit of an emotional roller coaster there.
Absolutely.
And you won't get every detail right, but you know that you're doing your best.
And I ask because so many of us don't talk about what we want, but also so many of us don't talk about death from a very young age. And it is the one guarantee in life. So I guess a big thing that I advocate with anybody who brings this particular topic up with me is start talking about it. Start normalizing that death is something that happens, because it does. And imagine, did you talk about death as a child growing up? Like, I certainly didn't, unless someone did pass and it was this big sad thing in the family.
So in my story, there has been lines of passing. And, when I was young with my dad's mum, who we were very close to, my grandmother, that happened when I was, I don't know, very early, like maybe 11, 12. So that's when it kind of first kind of arose. And then through loss of a friend and, those kinds of things, that it started to be something that, through those conversations it kind of came up, but also not necessarily about what we want or what we think about or what we feel about it. It's more just processing who that person was to us, or what that means. And you sometimes have that, what is the meaning of life? Because you're going through the grief of that.
Why does this happen?
But I would say also, from an Australian perspective, from the time, it's interesting, and also having experienced travel, it's just done so differently everywhere. And if you do get the opportunity to travel and to leave wherever your home country is and explore, if there's an opportunity for you to have a conversation with somebody about what it's like in their culture, I highly recommend that.
Amazing.
For my personal experience, from when my mum passed to when her funeral was 1 week. Whereas with, and we have it in a very formal, I think, ceremonious kind of way of gathering photos and doing paper ceremony
booklets.
And, the venue and where what's going to happen, all those more all these little logistical details that, take that time. And I think that in other cultures that I've experienced, the body is buried within 24 hours. And there is, I think where I was when I went and traveled in India, I was in a tour group, and we were going through on a bus together to our next destination, and we were kind of held up in traffic. And what was interesting was that it was just very calm. There was no beeping of cars and horns and all the things. There was just peace, because there was a lot of people coming through, and we were just what's this crowd about? And then all of a sudden we see this body that's been wrapped in white cloth, and you couldn't see the face, but you could see that it was a body of somebody who had passed, and the family were holding that body. And yes, there was raw emotion and grief with that, but there was also, I think it was rose petals, or their version of flowers that were being thrown behind, and there was a ceremony of people that went down to a lake. And just trigger warning on the next part, which is just about kind of cremation and that kind of thing. We actually, down at that river, you actually see that cremation taking place,
right,
live. And it's just and there's several at this particular riverside. There's several, that's kind of their version of a cemetery,
right?
There's several funerals happening side by side, several of these ceremonies.
And I guess something that jumps into my mind as you describe that scene is it's so open to the public, and so death and grief is so exposed, so that it's much more, I suppose, what's a good way of wording this? I'm actually, I want to make sure I get the right words here, because it's such a sacred moment. But
I think there's a way of maybe what you're saying is kind of like an accepted part of life or process, but also in the way that this was done, it's also very community, because and I do feel controversial, but I do feel that there are other countries that do community so much better than what we do.
I'm on board with this.
I feel slightly uncomfortable in saying that.
Oh no, I'm hearing this conversation everywhere lately.
I'm saying it, owning it, but I'm letting you know there's discomfort when I'm saying it, because there'll be people that disagree, but which is fine. But whilst within that experience, kind of to what you're pointing to, yes, there's a funeral happening here and there's one happening beside, and even though these people may not know each other, they've come together in grief, and they will stand side by side, even in silence.
Yeah, there's a camaraderie in that. Yeah.
Just an acknowledgement. I think it's just the most basic human level to acknowledge that somebody else is human.
Yes.
Without judgment, just with love.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
standing
At its
together in
essence.
suffering. And how much more healing will that be than standing separately and isolated in that suffering
Yeah.
or grief? Huge,
Yeah.
huge. And I guess one more thing that
Yeah.
I read the most beautiful book that was recommended to me. I forget the author, but it's called The In-Between. And it is a story of she's a death doula. She's a nurse in America, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, I gotta write down a book.
Yeah, like
Go,
that
go,
one
go.
or a
No, no,
different
no.
one?
A different one that I'm going to
Okay.
share that
Okay.
also was,
Spun
which I
with this.
think would be, yeah, recommend. Keep going.
Yes. Oh man, I've got a list for this particular topic. But this one was just beautiful. I was in tears, and it was not in sorrow. It was in like joy at the way that somebody, particularly this nurse, could create such a beautiful space in death for these people. And this is in a westernized culture. So it is possible. And I know death doulas are becoming increasingly popular, very slowly but surely. And I will certainly opt for one if I have that choice in my moment of passing. And something that comes up in that a lot in that book that I hold true, and I'm not saying everybody else has to, but it's just something I hold on to with a lot of hope around my time of passing, is these stories, and they're real life stories of people seeing their past loved ones, their ancestors, coming to take them in their moment of death. And they'll start seeing those people, a few days, weeks before. And I suppose something I want to ask you around that is like, if it's okay, like what was that moment of passing like for your mum?
I think it's one that, say, for example, well, not for example, this really happened. I got a call from her oncologist. I was really lucky to have built a relationship with him where I didn't take him for granted that they don't do, that he actually gave me his mobile number.
Wow.
And so he had mine, so he actually gave me a call, because at this point in time I lived about an hour and a half, 2 hours travel from my mum, and he gave me a call on a Monday at work to say, you need to gather the family, you've got 24 hours. And my mum pushed on for a week. So I think there's an interesting thing that if you're aware that your time is coming, you almost go through this phase, and I've heard this very common, that you almost like kind of come good, or the person comes good, and you're like, you don't look like you're like you look like you've turned a corner. And it's just, I can't explain what that moment is. Like, I haven't been able to fully articulate it before, the decline. And that decline can kind of go slow but also fast. And what I mean by that is loss of, appetite, loss of being able to eat, loss of being able to talk, loss of, of consciousness, and you're just left with breath. But she had said that she had peace, and had come to acceptance with it. But I don't truly know, because I think there's always going to be element they're trying to protect their child from having worry about their passing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's okay. Tears are welcome.
Tears are so welcome.
Grief will always be there.
Yeah. It's interesting within myself. I had a moment of like, oh my God, I just made Larissa cry. And I know it's not me, but it's just that my human reaction.
Yeah, but that's the thing that we're afraid of. We're afraid of like making someone cry and thinking that that's a bad thing, but it's not.
It's not.
It's allowing someone to have that grief or to release those emotions is a beautiful gift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Macklemore has these lyrics in one of his songs.
Oh, yeah. Not who I would have expected.
But he said, you die twice in life, not just once. But the first time you die is in that physical presence. And the second time you die is when people stop mentioning your name or stop talking about you. And for a child who's lost a parent, or I think even in the reverse, for parents who've lost children, whilst they're physically gone, you still think about them, you still love them, you still reminisce on pictures, you still want to hear their voice, you still wish they were still here. So it's not always, even though tears are shed because that's the longing and the missing of that connection, it's also being able to share a lovely and loving moment and having that be a warm feeling versus, it being something that's, just brushed under a rug.
Yes.
And the book, before I forget,
that
I want to share,
yes,
that I read post, which again was a game changer for me, was a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it's by a lady named Bronnie Wares, I think. And she essentially was a version of what you're calling a death doula, where she would go and sit with people in their end of life and have those stories. And she just found that there was 5 common themes and common patterns of people at that age. And this conversation is actually making me want to go read again, because I think it actually gets you into, it's not a sad book. I mean, you might have tears, but it's not a sad book in that for me, it really invigorated me to live life more and to just, again, go back to that. It's your one wild and precious life. Like, go and experience and create. And one thing that I want to mention to it when we talk about the fulfillment that I think is really important is that regardless whether you're in your 20s and you've established a career, or your 30s and you've established a career, or your 40s and you've established, or 50s, the biggest thing that I see presently that's coming up as a theme is that people are so afraid to start again, to go back and be a beginner in a new field, and they stay stuck in something or a place that they are really unhappy. But they're, it's secure, it's got the financial reward, or it's comfortable, or, there are these things that are tethered or holding people back in those, rather than taking that leap of faith and trusting that you will be okay because you keep taking action and you make those choices. And yes, you may have to go down in a pay grade or whatnot, but for the betterment of your future and your fulfillment. And
feeling your purpose.
Correct. And that actually reduces your anxiety about life and your anxiety about ending, because you're actually living on purpose. You feel like you're actually contributing something to yourself, the world around you, and then to the greater society.
Yeah, to your own soul. Yeah.
You can make me cry anytime. It's all right. I feel good.
I'm like waiting to wrap up so I can hug you. I've been sitting here having this debate of like, do I do that on camera right now? No, I'll probably pull the microphone over. So that's coming. Yeah. Get ready. I feel like this has been a very moving one. Like, for me personally, I'm very passionate about this topic, and it's something I would like to normalize a lot more, and I'm doing, my own practice, and that's my hopeful ripple effect for now. But yeah, hopefully this can spread to a wider audience and really move some people, maybe change this culture we have here in Australia just a little bit.
Yeah. Do you know that there are actually meetup groups that are around, I forget what they're called, but it's not as morbid as you think it is. It's about being able to be in a space and have these kinds of conversations that are healthy and part of life. I just want to let people know that there are, meetup groups and things like that do have these conversations. If you're curious on this and you're not finding your people or family and things being receptive. And I think that's also another thing that we do also have to respect, that where we are based in Australia, we have, people listening globally to this podcast. So it's very different in different cultures. But, we have to respect that if somebody's not, ready for it, or it's too confronting for them, that's okay. There are people and spaces where you can go and have these conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just do a little research.
Yes, build that community.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening, watching, and subscribing.
See you next week. I won't look at the camera. We've probably got to.
I will. We'll see you next week.
Bye.